Last year, I decided not to pre-order the Astro City Mini because of the high price, and the fact that it was not being developed by the video game gods of rock at M2. These were the guys behind my favorite retro mini consoles, the Genesis and TurboGrafx 16 Mini. Mini. But the reviews are in, and the people have spoken.
It is my favorite mini system so far.
The 2D emulation is rock solid for a device at this price point, and the build quality is simply outstanding.
But I still think this is the best mini console there's been.
So overall, I have to say that I'm really pleased with what SEGA has done here with the Astro City Mini.
So, should you buy this? Absolutely yes.
The consensus is clear. The Astro City Mini is good. And if you don't mind paying $120 to import it from Japan, or paying $40 for one of its dedicated controllers, or $80 for 2 dedicated controllers so you can play 2-player, or $120 for a massive arcade stick, and you love really old obscure arcade games, and you don't already use MAME on your PC, or you don't have an actual Astro City candy cabinet in your house, and you're old enough to remember how popular Shinobi was, and your house is already littered with retro mini consoles, or you wear Alex Kidd underwear, then the Astro City Mini might be for you. And since I meet at least a few of the right conditions, you guess which ones. And since it was my 39th birthday, I found myself the proud owner of an Astro City Mini, even though I plainly said months ago that I wasn't going to get one. Hey, I never said never. What I really meant was that I wasn't willing to pre-order something that was being made by SEGA Toys. If you watched our video about SEGA Toys, link in the description, then you would know all about this strange Sega Sammy subsidiary that's responsible for creating the Astro City Mini. And you'd know more about why I was hesitant to pre-order from the same company whose biggest claim to fame in the US might just be the Zuzu Pet.
This Juju or Zuzu Pet, Mr. Squiggles, may contain higher than allowed levels of the metal antimony, which could cause health problems.
You just really shouldn't suck on this, I think.
That is the general advice for all the toys. Don't put them in your mouths.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much.
Let's just see how well they did. Upon closer inspection, the Astro City Mini appears to be made of the absolute finest in cheap industrial resins. Indeed, according to SEGA Toys, this bad boy was built out of the exact same material as a real Astro City candy cabinet. That is to say, plastic. The stick is clicky, the buttons aren't sticky, the screen size is a little tricky, but speaker quality is surprisingly sicky. Included in the box is this nice HDMI cable to add to your HDMI cable collection. Because playing video games on a tiny screen with 2 players is difficult, we're going to go ahead and hook it up to our big screen TV here. Now let's just switch this bad boy on. The menu screen is simple but efficient and clear. On the left we have our game list numbered 1 through 36 in chronological order, in terms of the release date. There's no way to change this, but the game list is short enough that it wouldn't be necessary. Next to the name of every game is an icon meant to indicate the genre, but it's pretty much useless. Everything that isn't a shooter, fighter, or puzzle game is just given a little running man that's supposed to represent action, which is almost every game on here. On the right is a title card representing the game, and you can cycle through 2 different screenshots to give you an impression of what the game is like. And underneath that is the game's copyright holder, which is pretty much always Sega, and the game's year of release, the type of arcade board the game was built for, and another useless genre indicator. Run and guns, platformers, and beat 'em ups are all just called action games here.
I don't need your categories, man. I transcend labels. I'm more than a so-called failed mascot, man. I'm a human being. I'm a person, man. I have feelings.
Okay then. Let's just look at the settings. The settings can be accessed by pressing the button marked Credit on the control pad. And here they are. First off, Sega implores us to please read. Clicking that turns out to be health precautions for people who suffer from seizures. Going back, we see the language settings. I've already changed the menu settings to English when I first booted this bad boy up. But keep in mind, this doesn't make any of the Japanese text in any of the games English. This is a Japanese product meant for a Japanese audience, and so the games here all reflect that. Not that you really need to know Japanese to play any games on here, because you really don't. I can choose Japanese and what appear to be two different varieties of Chinese. Unfortunately, there's no option for Texas English, which I really prefer. Howdy y'all, I'm fixing to go on over to that dadgum old HEB over in town. Y'all want anything? I tell you what, they got them dang old Chinese noodles, man. You just stick it in the water, man, for like 3 minutes. You got yourself a meal. Going back, we can explore copyright. We find a baffling, lengthy legal document indicating that the Astro City Mini uses a GNU General Public License, which is a free license that indicates software users have been granted permission by software creators to access, share, and modify their software. This is really weird, and I'm guessing it pertains to the Astro City Mini's operating system, and not the games themselves. So is this like an open invitation from SEGA to hack the Astro City Mini? Quite possibly. By granting legal permission to do so, SEGA would only make the Astro City Mini that much more desirable. But I could be wrong. If you're a legal expert, could you please let us all know what's going on here in the comments? Thank you. Then you can change the brightness and the volume of the candy cabinet. This only affects the miniature candy cabinet screen and speakers, and a lot of people are bothered that you can't do this on the body of the unit itself with a dial or a switch. Since I don't plan on playing on the tiny screen very much, I personally don't care. You get two screen settings, default, or you can add shitty scan lines to all the games. And I mean really shitty. The scan lines option makes games virtually unplayable. I mean, just look at that! I prefer the default, so we'll stick with that. You get 3 different wallpapers, and I always go with black. And then, if you want, you can restore the Astro City Mini to its factory settings, in case you're embarrassed by all of your high score names. The settings and options are very basic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. What about the controller? The Astro City Mini does not require the purchase of a second controller to be played on your HDMI-ready TV, such as my massive $50 TV from Best Buy. Once plugged in, the screen goes black and the native stick and buttons will control the games fairly well. You might be concerned about the cramped size of these mini arcade controls, but I honestly found them to be adequate. The real trouble with this setup is having to wrestle with the Astro City Mini on your lap. It might be called a mini console, but it's a pretty big boy, and I found myself having to constantly adjust it while it gradually pulled me down closer to the Earth's core. Playing the Astro City Mini like this is just too much hassle. That's why you're definitely going to want to buy at least one of the external controllers that SEGA Toys has made especially for this occasion, and it will have to be made for the Astro City Mini by SEGA because nothing else seems to work. There are 2 options. The $120 arcade stick, which looks amazing, but it's $120, so I'm not going to buy that. And then there's the traditional gamepad, which is actually a really good controller. So you know, it's made of plastic. Shiny hard plastic that honestly feels pretty good on my old rough hands. So nice. As you can see, the layout of the controller looks pretty much like the Astro City Mini, except you get a comfortable responsive D-pad instead of the arcade stick. It feels good in the hand, and the buttons have a nice responsive snap to them. As you can see, there's some nice English on here, which is true to the actual Astro City candy cabinet, so that's a nice detail. Then you see these 2 extremely useful yellow buttons. As with real arcade games, you have to put in a credit to actually play. Since the Astro City Mini can't take any actual coinage, you're gonna have to press the credit button to start or continue every game. Press the credit button more than once, and you get more credits. Most games limit you to like 9 credits, but I like Space Harrier here, which lets me put in a stupid number of credits. The start button, of course, starts the game. Pressing both of the yellow buttons at any time after you've selected a game brings up a very useful menu that not only pauses the game, something that was impossible in the arcades, but it also allows you to save the game, load a saved game, reset, or return to the main menu. You can also quickly go back to the game simply by tapping the E button. Also, you'll notice that this screen tells you the controller layout for each and every game, which is often very useful. Now, some people might be wondering, can you play two-player games on the Astro City Mini with only one additional controller? I'm happy to report that you can. One person will have to hold the Astro City Mini on their laps the entire time, which will gradually suck them down into the Earth's core, but this arrangement absolutely does work. I went with the most comfortable option and simply bought two of the controllers, which set me back a pretty penny, $40 a piece. All of that is really interesting, but can we talk about the freaking games already? The Astro City Mini contains 36.5 games. I say 36.5 because one of the games on here doesn't really count as a game at all. Not as far as I'm concerned. Dotori-kun, or Dot Race, was a test PCB game that came pre-installed on all Astro City candy cabinets starting in 1990. Arcade test PCBs, such as this, only exist because the Japanese Ministry of Industry decided to lump JAMA-ready arcade cabinets in with a pre-existing electrical device safety law. Under Japanese law, an arcade game machine is defined as a set that must include the cabinet, the monitor, and any other component needed for operation, included the printed circuit board housing the actual game. Any cabinets without a PCB game board, then, were defined as unfinished electronics products and were therefore forbidden to be sold on the market. Because safety reasons, I guess. JAMA-ready video game cabinets, however, are built without pre-installed games on purpose. In fact, that was the reason JAMA was created in the first place. It was supposed to allow arcade owners to cheaply and conveniently change out old games for new ones without having to acquire or move an entirely new cabinet. Forcing manufacturers to include the games in their generic JAMA cabinet was completely pointless. But in order to accommodate the pointless law, arcade game manufacturers making JAMA-ready cabinets like Sega's Astro City started included cheaply made test PCBs with every cabinet sold. Taito included a game known as Minivaders with their cabinets, and just as the name suggests, it was a truncated, soundless, colorless version of Space Invaders. Konami had Mogura Dese, which looked like a kind of whack-a-mole game. And Sega had Dotori-kun. The game lacks music, color, or any kind of presentation that might make you believe it's a game whatsoever. But it is technically a game, and it can be played. But you probably wouldn't want to. It's neat that they included this for historical reasons, but this hardly counts as number 37 of 37 games. The other 36 games on the Astro City Mini are, in fact, real games, and the choices Sega made here are very interesting for a couple of reasons. If you were to put these games in chronological order according to their original release dates, and that's exactly what Sega did here, then you'd soon realize that Sega went to great lengths in order to more or less evenly represent every year from 1984 to 1994, a 10-year span that was, without a doubt, Sega's greatest and most successful stretch as a game developer. For most years between 1984 and 1994, the Astro City Mini offers 3 or 4 different games. The only exceptions are 1992, which is only represented by 2 games, and 1984, which is only represented by the game Flicky. Roughly half the games are from the 1980s, while the other half are all from 1990 to 1994. But let me ask you, what were the 2 most popular genres in the arcades at the time? Undoubtedly fighting and racing games, and Sega made plenty of classics in both of those categories. However, the Astro City Mini only has 2 fighting games and 1 racing game. On the other hand, what was possibly the least popular genre in the arcades? Puzzle games. I'm guessing puzzle games must have been extremely popular in Japan because the Astro City Mini contains no less than 7, which means that nearly 20% of all the games included here are puzzle games. Making matters worse is the fact that, of those puzzle games, 4 of them are redundant sequels. You have Columns, which is an inescapable SEGA classic that is always packed in with every collection imaginable, but you also get Columns 2 and Stack Columns. Why? Subtle differences between these games aside, they basically all play the same. The same exact issue extends to Puyo Puyo and Puyo Puyo 2, 2 puzzle games that are so similar that more than one is too many. Indeed, Puyo Puyo itself is so similar to Columns that I wonder if we really needed to represent both series. And then there are both of the puzzle and action games. Same issue. I'd say that reduces the unique number of games down to 32 entries. We've got 6 different shooters, including Space Harrier. We've got 5 different run and gun games. We've got 6 different beat 'em ups. And a whopping 9 platformers. But again, what happened to the fighting games and racers? Where's Hang On, Outrun, Virtua Racing, Super Monaco GP, Daytona USA, Sega Rally, Power Drift, Outrunners? All of these racing games came out between 1984 and 1994, and Sega made incredible racing games. Typically for special arcade cabinets that you could bounce around in like a carnival ride, with steering wheels and all that. You mean to say that Radmobile was the only racing game they thought was worth including? That's literally the last racing game I would have considered including. Then there's the fighting games. The Astro City Mini has 6 buttons. Sega has made and is selling 6-button controllers to go with it. And that includes a $120 massive 6-button arcade stick. It costs as much as the Astro City Mini itself. And you have to understand, nothing else works on this thing. So what genre requires you to have 6 buttons in the first place? Why do you need so many buttons? It's for fighting games. No other arcade genre needed 6 buttons except for fighting games. And we get 2 on here. Virtua Fighter, which is an important one, probably the biggest title included here for a number of reasons, but the only other game is Dark Edge, which is disappointing. My question is, where is Virtua Fighter 2? We've got 3 games on here from 1994 and no Virtua Fighter 2? The best game of that year? The best fighting game Sega ever made? Putting both Virtua Fighter 1 and 2 on here would have made a $120 arcade stick seem like it was worth it. But with only one Virtua Fighter, I really don't get it. They put 2 sequels to Columns, they included both Puyo Puyo games, and both puzzle and action games. And only one Virtua Fighter? Who's in charge at Sega?
Whoa, dude, chill out. The Astro City Mini will probably be hacked. Then you can upload all the games you prefer.
Well, you know, dude, that's true, but it's also beside the point of owning something like this in the first place. I mean, if you could just get any arcade game you want off of MAME already, it really begs the question as to why you'd ever spend $120 for an Astro City Mini, right? I think people like me are hoping for a way to both re-experience the best of Sega's golden age while also supporting the brand, in the hopes that maybe, one day, Sega will rise back from the ashes. And my complaints aside, this is still a very interesting game library. It's not all bad. Good decisions were made. But given the controller issue and the lack of fighting and racing games, we are left with an important question. Was this thing worth $120 to import? Plus the $80 extra that I spent so I could play all the 2-player games with my kids? Maybe. Let's just go ahead and look at each of the games one by one. And since this is a device meant to celebrate Sega's history as a video game developer, I thought it would be fun to try and think about these games in terms of their historical context. Let's take a look at game number 1, which came out in 1984. 1984. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan wins a steel cage match to retain his title as President of the United States of America. High school bully and all-around douche, Daniel LaRusso wins the All-Valley Karate Tournament. Hasbro launches their popular Transformers line of robot toys, forever changing the lives of 40-year-old men living in the future. Spinal Tap, England's loudest band, nearly breaks up before becoming huge in Japan. And also in Japan, Sega Enterprises was acquired by a software company called CSK, which gave rise to both Sega of America and Sega of Europe in the same year. 1984 was also the year of Flicky. According to Game Machine, Flicky was the second most popular table arcade game in Japan for 1984, and it must have been a major hit for Sega, because the game has been ported many times. Flickies are also a recurring species of bird that appear in the Sonic the Hedgehog series, starting with the original Sonic game back in 1991. So Flicky has been around for quite a while, but this is the original arcade version of Flicky, and it is old school, bearing a lot in common with the many Pac-Man-like maze-running games of the late 70s and early 80s. Instead of eating dots, Flicky is supposed to be a mother sparrow who has more babies than a working-class Catholic family before the 1960s. And she's got her hands full because her babies, known as Pio Pio within the game, are scattered all over the place.
I swear I was just going into the store for a second, and when I came back, all these cats were trying to eat my babies. So I threw a hammer at them.
The goal of Flicky is to scoop up all of the baby Pio Pios and lead them to the level exit, without getting touched by a cat. There's only one action button that allows you to jump, and if you happen to pick up an item other than a baby bird, it lets you both jump and throw a projectile that smashes enemies.
Okay, so I threw a phone at them too.
But sharing the same button as the jump button makes this a little awkward, since every time you throw an item you jump, and every time you jump you lose your item. I think this game really needed a dedicated attack button. Then there are the bonus stages wherein the cats are cruelly hurling your babies into the air with a seesaw, and you need to catch as many as you can before they fall to their death.
That's okay, I always keep a net in my purse.
It's hard to say what this game really did for Sega as a company, but it plainly did something, because they love Flicky. It's everywhere. I suspect that it was a very important game for Sega's first year as a new company under CSK. It was probably a critical time to prove to both CSK and the new chairman, Isao Okawa, that Sega was a worthy investment. And if Flicky made a lot of money in the arcades, then maybe Sega was able to do just that. Maybe, in some ways, Flicky was a sign of great things to come. And that's probably why we find the game here. I like this game. It's simple, yet satisfying. 1985. In 1985, Commodore launches the Amiga personal computer. Super Mario Bros. Is released in Japan for the Famicom, and the NES makes its debut in the United States. The first WrestleMania took place at Madison Square Garden. Marty McFly goes back to the future. Students in the UK go on strike. And it would prove to be a banner year for both Sega as a video game brand and for a young programmer by the name of Yu Suzuki. Suzuki had only been with Sega since 1983, but his programming skills proved to be so impressive that he was quickly promoted to project leader for arcade development. Yu Suzuki was an avid fan of cars, motorcycles, and amusement park rides. Thus, utilizing a new arcade board developed by Sega, Suzuki revolutionized the arcade experience toward games that resembled full-blown motion simulators or virtual reality, years before most people would have even dreamt of such topics. Hang On was the first of Yu Suzuki's so-called super-scaling games, which created the illusion of 3D depth by simultaneously scaling a large number of sprites at a high rate. Suzuki went even further by implementing motorcycle simulating hardware that players could actually ride, taking the sense of speed and immersion generated by racing games to brand new heights. Hang On was a monumental success for Sega, and a game changer for the company that would continue to be one of the best-selling arcade games in the world, straight on into the 90s. So, of course, the Astro City Mini doesn't have Hang On, for some reason. But Yu Suzuki must have been sleeping at work during 1985 because by the end of that same year, Sega released their second super-scaling cabinet that could be ridden like a freaking theme park ride. Space Harrier, Game number 4 on the Astro City Mini. Space Harrier utilized the same super scaling technique along with an even more elaborate body sensation game cabinet, or Taikon, which bounces the player all over the place. And as you all well know, getting bounced all over the place is one of the funnest things in the world. And it's the secret to making Space Harrier such a fun and memorable game. The game itself is a fantasy-themed rail shooter wherein the player moves the Harrier, this little dude over here is supposed to be the Harrier, around a 2D axis. That is left, right, up, and down. And what exactly is a Harrier anyway? Well, it's a variety of hawk. To create the illusion of fast 3D motion, as with Hang On, the Harrier moves against a background that consists of layers of sprites rapidly scaling, from small to big and vice versa. This creates the illusion of a rapid forward motion. And as this happens, objects get dangerously close to hitting our Harrier, killing him in spectacular fashion. Luckily, you have more than one life to play the game, and a freaking cannon that shoots ovals of death. The goal of the game is to not let your Harrier get hit by objects, and to shoot anything and everything that moves. Space Harrier was released in December of 1985, but already by January of 1986 it was one of the most popular games in Japan. And the game would go on to be one of the most popular and iconic SEGA games ever made. And a testament to this widespread popularity is the fact that Space Harrier has been ported perhaps more than any other SEGA game in existence. But the Astro City Mini has Yu Suzuki's arcade original, with the incredible soundtrack by Hiro. And even though it's difficult to recreate the hydraulic thrill of being bounced around in the original game's cockpit, the illusion of speed and the thrill of blasting everything that moves remains intact. There are two other games from 1985 on the Astro City Mini. Ninja Princess was released on March of 1985 and would go on to be one of the most popular tabletop arcade games for the year, at least in Japan. The artwork was done by a young Ryoko Kodama and features a medieval Japanese princess who takes on the form of a ninja in order to kick ass and smash an evil warlord. If you've ever played the classic Capcom run-and-gun game Commando, then you more or less know how to play Ninja Princess. But oddly enough, Ninja Princess was released a couple of months before Commando. So maybe we should say that Commando plays like Ninja Princess. A unique feature of this game is the ability to momentarily disappear and reappear like a ninja. When you do this, you're momentarily invincible, and it gives you a chance to get out of sticky situations and or change your angle of attack. Your throwing shurikens can also counter enemy attacks. Some of the levels in Ninja Princess allow you to backtrack, which gives you some room to strategize the best approach to taking on this game's many fast-moving enemies. The levels are also detailed and feature a lot of fun and unique stuff. Wading through the rice paddies slows you down. Boulders come hurling down upon you. You're attacked by packs of wolves. You have to navigate a river while balancing on logs. The variety of challenges for such an old game is truly commendable. Ninja Princess would be released on the SG-1000 and the Sega Master System the following year. However, the Master System version of the game would be reimagined and repackaged as just The Ninja. The games were very similar, but the music was changed, and the Ninja Princess was replaced by a brand new male protagonist who needs to, wait for it, save the princess. Despite dumping the original heroine, the Ninja is still one of my all-time favorite games for the Master System. And for the same reasons, Ninja Princess is easily one of my favorite games appearing on the Astro City Mini. Also in 1985 came a game that everyone loves to hate called My Hero, which wasn't even developed by Sega, but rather Corland, the same company that had developed the excellent Sega-published Pango only a couple of years earlier. My Hero gets a lot of flack from gamers today, but apparently back in 1985, according to Game Machine magazine, it was popular. It's one of the earliest examples of the beat-em-up genre, which had only come into existence a year before with Irem's Kung Fu. To put this game in perspective, my hero is a year older than Renegade, and 2 years older than Double Dragon. However, unlike all of these other beat-em-up pioneers, my hero also plays a lot like a platformer, and it would even be a pioneer in that regard because it came out the same year as Super Mario Bros. One day after Japanese high school, you're out walking with your girlfriend when some punk rock looking jerk just comes up and runs off with her. So now his gang is going to try and kill you so he can have a date with her at the beach. Your friend tries to help, but he just gets in the way until he finally gets killed, but you still manage to get to the beach anyway, and then you just do a low kick a bunch of times in order to beat him, and so then of course he's crying, so you have to try and comfort him, and your girlfriend is happy to see you, but you're too busy with your new BFF to pay much attention, and meanwhile, a ninja runs up and grabs your girlfriend and snatches her again, so now you're doing the same thing, but you're beating up ninjas in medieval Japan, and I'm not even gonna tell you who snatches your girlfriend the third and final time because it's too funny and I don't want to spoil it. This game is kind of crazy, and being such an early genre pushing title, there are quite a few frustrating things about this game that the player is going to have to deal with. Issues that later games would eventually improve upon, like hit detection. Your character barely has any attack range, and yet it seems like every little thing that gets within a foot of you kills you. A lot of the enemy patterns will also take a lot of practice to discern and memorize, but doing so will be very hard because it's one-hit death. Just getting past this early knife-wielding enemy was a nightmare until I learned that you need to do a jump kick on top of her. But how was I supposed to know that approaching from this awkward angle would actually work? You have the ability to attack upward, but that's a complete waste as this move is never useful in the game. Ever. Finally, there's no actual ending for this game. Your girlfriend just keeps getting kidnapped in an infinite loop, and that kinda sucks. In the end, my hero is bright and colorful, has a great sense of humor, and ambitious level design for the time period. But it's also so punishingly difficult and frustrating that I'm not sure how many people are gonna want to see that third level. (1986). A Soviet nuclear reactor explodes in Chernobyl, leading to a 1,000 square mile exclusion zone that is heavily contaminated by radioactive fallout. Top Gun is top at the box office. SEGA releases the Mark III in the US as the Master System. Also, SEGA had yet another major arcade hit from Yu Suzuki in the form of the classic racing simulator Outrun. I mean, just listen to that soundtrack. Look at those beautiful backgrounds! Outrun does not appear on the Astro City Mini. This does though. In March of 1986, SEGA introduced the world to what many believe was their original company mascot in the form of Opa Opa, the star of the hit arcade game Fantasy Zone. Fantasy Zone is an incredibly popular side-scrolling space shooter that is often credited as being the first ever Q-'em-up. And like Space Harrier, it has been ported to an unbelievable number of consoles and retro game collections over the years, including the excellent TurboGrafx-16 Mini. Unlike most space shooters, which tend to play against dark backgrounds, Fantasy Zone utilizes a bright pastel color palette, and allows the player to scroll both forward and backward, against a relentless barrage of enemies that can attack from all directions. You control Opa Opa, a little sentient spaceship with wings and legs who's fighting to defend the Fantasy Zone from an alien invasion of super cute creatures. In every level you need to fly around and kill the UFO-like space pods that keep spewing out enemies. And once they're all destroyed, Opa Opa faces off against a massive screen-filling boss enemy. That's the gist of every level. Aiding you in your encounter is the option to stop into the shop and buy weapons upgrades with the golden-looking currency that's acquired from destroying enemies. Most everything you shoot seems to drop at least a little bit of money. This perversely incentivizes Opa Opa to kill everything on screen indiscriminately. Seriously, as cute as this game looks, it's actually by far one of the most horrifically violent games available for the Astro City Mini. Take that, and that! Die, scum! Die, die, die! Fantasy Zone is a very hard game, but the Astro City Mini has given you the option to use a rapid fire button, which dramatically reduces the difficulty and frustration level. Holy cow, I wish this game was always playable like this. This is freaking awesome! Game number 6 on the Astro City Mini is the original arcade version of Wonder Boy, which came out in April of 1986. Developed by Weststone for Sega's System 1 arcade board, Wonder Boy is a fun and fast-paced platformer that would spawn several sequels and spin-offs, which would all culminate in making the Wonder Boy name one of the most influential in retro gaming. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Your girlfriend has been kidnapped by the bad guy, and so you must traverse up to 8 lengthy levels that are broken into 4 sections apiece. Though each level honestly appears more or less the same and culminates in pretty much the same exact boss fight each and every time. Unlike My Hero, however, it's actually possible to beat this game. Make critical jumps, throw your trusty stone hatchet, ride a freaking skateboard, the 80s, right? And of course, get down with the fairy of invincibility and destroy all comers. But be careful, because just like in real life, unless you're constantly eating tons of food every second, you'll soon find yourself becoming just another victim of hypoglycemia. Don't let that happen. Clean your plate. Wonder Boy is a fun, if not somewhat simplistic platformer that I enjoy playing from time to time. It's radical! Next up for 1986 on the Astro City Mini is an extremely disappointing ROM dump of Quartet 2. And no, this is not the sequel to a game called Quartet, but rather this is the 2-player version of what was designed to be a 4-player cabinet, hence the name Quartet. Quartet is a quirky platformer with ugly graphics, fantastic music, and frustrating repetitive gameplay. Essentially, every stage is a kind of obstacle course of endlessly spawning, fast-moving enemies, which you have to navigate in order to first find the boss of the level, then beat it, and finally get a key to the level exit door, which is sometimes nearby and sometimes hidden somewhere at the complete other side of the stage. Along the way are a bunch of mostly useless power-ups and, once again, relentless spawning, fast-moving enemies which effectively slows down what is already a slow-moving slog of a game. 2 players can tackle this challenge simultaneously, but the truth is that the game becomes even less fun this way because you constantly get in each other's way. If the other player is blocking your path, then you're completely stuck. I found endlessly blasting enemies to be mildly fun for a few minutes, but after a while I was pretty much ready to move on. However, some people, like Joe from GameSack for some reason, say they actually really like this game. And I think they're going to be super disappointed when they realize that the dump of this game on the Astro City Mini contains a game-breaking glitch that's familiar to MAME users. It affects the stage layouts for level 15, 16, and 17 in such a way that it makes this version of the game not only incomplete, but virtually unbeatable. Here's how level 15 of Quartet is supposed to look. Notice these moving platforms here. Now here's level 15 of Quartet as it appears on the Astro City Mini. The moving platforms are gone. Without those moving platforms, getting past this section of the game is much harder. Unfortunately, the subsequent levels are also affected. I don't really think Quartet is that great of a game to begin with, but this version here is unacceptably broken, and it makes me wonder about what other possible glitches or game-ending emulation issues are hiding on here, without my knowledge. This sucks. Finally, toward the end of 1986, Sega introduced Alex Kidd to both the Master System and the arcade. The Master System got Alex Kidd in Miracle World, but the arcade saw the System 16 platformer Alex Kidd and the Lost Stars, which also featured a female friend for Alex in the person of Stella. Now, a lot of people have badmouthed this game recently. Sega Lord X says this is a bad game, but I'm here to tell you, this is not a bad game. This is a mediocre game, and it's a mediocre game that I sorta like more than I should. First of all, this is 2-player simultaneous co-op action, and who doesn't love that? And unlike Quartet, you can actually be a boon to one another as opposed to a hindrance. See? I'm helping Stella get up higher. How cool is that? Further, we have yet another amazing soundtrack by Hero, and the graphics are, in my opinion, really good. The problem is in just how simple the level layouts are, and yet frustrating. It's like a ton of care went into the style and design and almost nothing went into crafting a perfect level. There are a lot of cheap hits and deaths in this game, and yet at the same time, there's not a whole lot going on. You just run to the right, fall a bunch of times, keep popping quarters, bounce back up, run to the right until you get to the end of the level. There are power-ups, but they don't really matter that much. You'll get hit or fall and lose them almost immediately. There are no bosses, you just have to reach these endpoints, and Opa is at the end of level 2 to announce his retirement as the SEGA mascot. There is some kind of story to go along with this, but it's crazy convoluted. And to be honest, it sounds like it was just sort of contrived to make sense of the fact that there is no villain in the game. The last target you reach is a ziggurat, and so they just decided the villain's name is Ziggurat. Except, that's not a name. No one's named Ziggurat. Speak for yourself, buddy. I personally enjoy this game, but I can't say for sure you will. It depends on how much you can take this sound. In 1987, Irish American magazine wondered if Joe Biden would ever be president. Arnold would engage in mortal combat with the Predator. The NEC and Hudson's PC Engine launches in Japan with Bikuriman. Mike Tyson Mania helps push US NES sales into the stratosphere. And Sega finally released the Master System in Europe, saving an entire continent from shitty PC games. Also released in 1987 was Alien Syndrome, an excellent overhead run and gun very loosely based on the Alien franchise. Each level requires you to locate and rescue all of the human captives of an alien infestation. At the beginning of each stage, a time bomb has been set, so unless you find all the captives and make it to the exit before the clock runs down, the entire level will explode, ending the game in the process. If you do manage to rescue everyone and find your way to the exit, then you'll be treated to a challenging but awesome looking boss encounter. Then it's off to repeat the process across a wide variety of disgusting infested spaceships. This game is a lot like living in my apartment. Every level is jam-packed with rapidly spawning waves of aliens to kill. Luckily, there are a variety of weapons stored in the walls of every level, and they'll all come with infinite ammo. Just pick your favorite. My favorite is the laser gun. Or is it the flamethrower? There are also maps which help you quickly locate the remaining hostages, and that takes the blind guessing and memorization out of the gameplay, and that's always a good thing. This game is really hard, and unfortunately, if you lose all of your lives during any level, even though you've dumped a bunch of credits into the game, it's still game over, and you have to start the game all over again. So if you want to beat this game, then you're going to have to get really good because you have to do it all on one credit. Alien Syndrome is one of my all-time favorite Sega arcade games, and its two-player mode is one of the best justifications for owning a second controller. Also released in the summer of 1987 is Wonder Boy in Monsterland, a cutesy sequel to Wonder Boy that features swordplay and adventure game elements analogous to games like Zelda. However, though this appears to play like an adventure game, it's really more of a linear platformer insofar as each level is a contained, discrete area, though later levels can get complex enough to require backtracking and even level grinding. Unfortunately for non-Japanese speakers, this is a very text-heavy game for an arcade title, but at the same time, it's relatively easy to infer what's going on graphically. There's not much to it in terms of a story, and it doesn't hurt to have played the Master System version of this game in preparation. The music in this game is super catchy. Love it. But for a game that requires so much swordplay, the range and hit detection of your weapon is really bad. Look at those sad, stubby little arms. This isn't a bad game or anything, but this is probably the saddest Wonder Boy game ever made. It's not as good a platformer as its predecessor, and yet it's not as good an adventure game as any of its successors. I kinda don't really care that much for this one. But a game that I could not have done without is the excellent Shinobi, which was released in November of 1987 for the Sega System 16 arcade board. Shinobi is a tough-as-nails side-scrolling platformer wherein you take control of Joe Musashi, a non-COVID compliant ninja with a dorky haircut and a really funny walk. Joe's got a problem. The problem is that an evil gang of ninjas has kidnapped all the world's ginger kids and forced them to wear pink pajamas. In order to beat each level, you must rescue each and every ginger and then find your way to the exit. Thankfully, unlike Alien Syndrome, this isn't timed. Oh no, wait, it's totally timed. So basically, this game is a side-scrolling Alien Syndrome with ninjas instead of aliens, and you get fewer weapons. But you do have the option of using the badass ninja magic once in every level, though not doing so gives you a big bonus to your score if you like playing for points. And I know you don't. Shinobi is an outstanding action game and easily one of the best Sega coin-ops of the 80s. It was also extremely difficult with one-hit deaths and enemies that will just come out of nowhere. For that reason, in my opinion, the best way to play this game is the Sega Ages version that was developed by M2 for the Switch. That version gives you a lot of fun options, such as the convenient ability to rewind time in order to redo parts of the level that you're stuck on. Also, the Astro City Mini version of Shinobi erased the Marilyn Monroe poster from the walls in level 1. This is what the level is supposed to look like. Why did they get rid of them? Shinobi is a classic, and it plays pretty much perfectly here, as far as I can tell. But if I'm being honest, I'll probably stick to playing the version on the Switch. Also from 1987 is Sonic Boom, a vertical scrolling shooter that not a lot of people seem to like. First off, it's not a well-known arcade game in the US. So unlike Shinobi, we're not going to ignore its many shortcomings and love it for the nostalgia. Second, it has a very narrow aspect ratio, which renders the game pretty much unplayable when using the Astro City Mini's tiny native screen. On a big screen it looks better, but there is some noticeable shimmering going on due to the Astro City Mini apparently not using any pixel scaling algorithms. Further, this game is really hard. It's normal for shooters from the 80s to be hard, but I think the one factor that separates being just hard from frustratingly hard is when a shooter includes one-hit deaths that force you to repeat any part of a level. This is one of those games where when you get hit, you're sent back to the beginning, and powerless. I guess Fantasy Zone is like that too, but somehow that game was a lot less generic, so it gets a pass. I actually liked playing Sonic Boom. It has a nice crunch to it when I blow stuff up, but I reckon that unless you're a huge fan of the genre, that this game probably won't do much for you. In 1988, the Nakatomi building in Los Angeles is blown up by a gang of German fashion models. Randy Savage defeats Ted DiBiase to become the WWF Heavyweight Champion. The touching animated family comedy Akira comes out in Japan. The Sega Mega Drive also comes out in Japan with Space Harrier 2 and Super Thunderblade. Outrun wins Game of the Year for 1987 at the Golden Joystick Awards. And the Sega arcade hit Altered Beast astonishes gamers the world over with its incredible digitized voices and massive super buff character sprites. Man, look at the size of these guys. It's like Hans and Franz got their own video game. This is Altered Beast on the Astro City Mini, a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and it looks and plays astonishingly similar to the Sega Genesis version that was released a year later. Back in the day, this game was considered both cool and popular, sorta like Parachute Pants. Only today, much like Parachute Pants, this game is neither cool or popular. Personally, I love this game, especially as a two-player experience, and the arcade version here is essentially as good as it gets. Who doesn't want to get ripped? Who doesn't want to eventually turn into a werewolf? Who doesn't want to make out with a bird that turns into a woman? How do you think I met my wife? My muse, my love. Great game. Scramble Spirits also came out in 1988. This is a shooter that bears so much in common with Sonic Boom that I think it's probably safe to assume that this is the sequel. Both have a similar graphical style, though I like the retro propeller plane look of this game much better. Both utilize a power-up system that consists of amassing more and more wingmen to increase your attack power. Both make this cool crunching sound when you take out enemies. But this game has a catchier soundtrack and is a lot more fun to play. You no longer have to restart the level after your plane is hit and destroyed. You start back up right where you stand, and that's way less frustrating. Further, this game has a neat little bonus section during each level where the screen zooms in, the sprites get huge, and you have to plow through a bunch of ground targets like a dive bomber. Something makes me feel a little uncomfortable about doing this from the Japanese perspective for some reason. Like, maybe I really shouldn't be enjoying it this much. Oh well.
Banzai!
Best of all though, this game supports two-player simultaneous co-op, and two-player shooters are always a lot of fun for our family.
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair is the 15th game on the Astro City Mini, and it also came out in 1988. There are actually two different Wonder Boy 3 games. One was an adventure game for the Master System, also known as the Dragon's Trap. The other is this arcade game, which is actually a shooter of all things. It's set in the Wonder Boy world, it has that Wonder Boy look and feel, but it's a horizontal scrolling shooter that's also a platformer? Yup. And just like the original Wonder Boy, you have to constantly eat fruit to keep from dying. So with one button you have to shoot everything that moves, and with the other you have to jump from platform to platform. It's either the best of both worlds, or it's more than the human brain was meant to handle. Wonder Boy 3 has a simple power-up system that lets you cycle through all sorts of different tools of destruction. My favorite is the wide shot here, since it frees up some RAM in my brain to let me focus on platforming. As with all other shooters on the Astro City Mini, SEGA has included an optional rapid fire button. I suggest pressing it and never letting go. Ever. Not even when you're in the bathroom. Also, this is one of those rare and yet awesome shooters that let you play two-player simultaneous co-op, and as I've said before, that's always a bonus at our house. Game number 16 on the Astro City Mini, released in 1988, is Gain Ground. The developers of Gain Ground were really brave in a lot of ways. They said that good games had to be fast, but they made it slow. They said that good games have to have good graphics, but they made it ugly. They said good games had to have good music, so they did that. They said that good games had to be fun, and they said yes, we will make it fun. We will make it a fun game that looks like D&D but plays more like a sports game. We will make it, in fact, an action strategy game that rewards slow, meticulous planning over blind running and gunning. And that is what we have here, folks. And it is good, especially with a friend playing at the same time. Gain Ground is a hard game to describe, but think of it as football, but with one person at a time. You got a dude who throws spears, a gun bomb lady, and gun guy. They need to either kill everyone on screen, which is dangerous, or make a mad dash for the exit, one at a time. So you survey the field, you think of your strength and your weakness, and plan your attack, and run very slowly across the field of battle. Every now and then you pick up a new guy with new skills and new abilities that will help you beat the later levels. There's a trick to each level. Simply shooting your way through always leads to ruin, and you are rewarded for using your noodle. You are rewarded with noodles. No, you are a noodle, and as such, you have what it takes to beat this strange, yet oddly addictive, meticulous game that might be, at the same time, one of the ugliest games that I have ever played. Seriously, everything and everyone looked just like a booger. I really mean it. It's a great game, but it was actually way better on the Master System. (1989). 1989 might be the greatest year in human history. First of all, the Berlin Wall fell down, and the entire Eastern Bloc was liberated. Try and top that. Okay, I will. This is the year that both the Sega Genesis and the TurboGrafx-16 came out. Together! This was the year Batman came out. The good one with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade came out. Again, it's the good one. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure came out. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ghostbusters 2, Weekend at Bernie's. 1989 is the year that The Simpsons debuted on TV. The freaking Game Boy came out. 1989 was an incredible year. And undoubtedly the most popular Sega arcade game in 1989 was Golden Axe. And honestly, if Capcom's Final Fight hadn't come out that same year, Golden Axe would have been the best arcade game of the year for sure. Based heavily on the Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja action movies of the 80s, Golden Axe was an 80s D&D nerd's dream come true. You have really cool weapons combos, you had a lot of different magic animations you could mess around with, giant badass enemies to kick in the face. The music sounded like it was done by Basil Constantine Polidorus himself. Also, I'm pretty sure that's a scantily clad 16-bit sprite of Bridget Nielsen. As a kid, I played the Sega Genesis version of the game all the time, and it remains my favorite version of the game, perhaps for nostalgia, or perhaps because the Genesis version added another level and had a versus mode. Either way, the version on the Astro City Mini is the arcade original, and it's the one that most people prefer. And it looks, sounds, and plays spectacularly on my massive 16-inch TV. It's a great game. But my favorite Sega game that came out in 1989 is actually number 17 on the Astro City Mini, Crackdown. Or as the game calls itself for some reason, Cracktown. Cracktown is a story about Ben and Andy, two extremely young, big, buff dudes from parts unknown, who now work for the federal government as professional blow shit up guys. And what do they have to blow up? Well, it's clear. You see, there's this guy and he has this big base, and he transforms himself into M. Bison, and then he's got all these mutant goons, including a baboon thing, and then there's this picture of some guy with hypertrichosis, and is that the devil? The devil is in this? Not quite. That's actually Baphomet of Levi, an image popularized by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century.
It's the devil, I tell you, the devil!
So Ben and Andy are on a mission to go to this island and blow up the minions of the devil himself. Cracktown at first appears to be just another overhead run-and-gun game akin to Commando or Alien Syndrome, but in fact it's a lot more like Gain Ground or Metal Gear, insofar as you are rewarded for stealthy, tactical gameplay. Highlighting this approach are many narrow corridors and doorways, which you can sneakily hug in order to get the drop on some hellspawn. You have limited ammo, so getting around enemies is sometimes the best approach, and if you're close enough, you can always use your karate skills. In addition to your normal gun, you can also pick up a handy rocket launcher that more or less plays the same, but inflicts way more damage. The goal of each level is to navigate the labyrinth-like levels in order to find all of the designated targets, marked with a red X. Make it to the target and a time bomb is placed. Arm all the bombs at all the targets and then you're clear to make your way towards the exit. But like I said, simply blasting your way out of the level is not the best approach. You have to think. See, I can't just run out in front of this guy. Using a little strategy, I'll find a different way to approach and take care of business. Yeah! Like that. Here's another example. Watch as I... Okay, sometimes this game will just drop bullshit on you in spite of smart gameplay, but you knew they would. This is an arcade game designed to steal your quarters. Sega's not running a charity here, people. Plus, in case you're surrounded and the situation gets desperate, you can always use your super grenade once in every level, which clears the screen of enemies. Whoa, listen to that again. Where have I heard that? It's the exact same sound effect used for Ninja Magic in Shinobi. Crackdown was directed by Sega veteran Yutaka Sugano, who was also responsible for the original Shinobi, and I guess he really liked that sound effect a lot. Crackdown is basically a hidden gem at this point in that no one ever talks about it, even though it's actually a really good game. I think the thing that probably kills it for most people is its strange presentation. The massive game map takes up like a third of the screen, and even if you're not playing 2-player mode, the screen is split between both 1 and 2 players. At the same time, however, the sprites in this version of the game just look fantastic, and the gameplay is exciting and fast-paced. The map may take up a lot of the screen, but it is essential to gameplay insofar as it keeps you from getting lost in the game's large areas. And with 2 players working together at the same time, the split screen is again actually a huge help, since it allows you to split up or creatively double team your enemies. On top of that, the music in this game is fantastic. It was done by Yuzo Koshiro, the same guy responsible for the music from Streets of Rage and The Revenge of Shinobi. This is as good an opportunity as any to tell you that on the Astro City's menu, for some games, such as this one, there's the option to listen to a complete looping version of the game's BGM audio, at least one particular song. Just listen to that awesome music and get down. Crackdown is a great game that's often overlooked, though admittedly it's also extremely hard. Maybe even unfairly hard in some spots. That's just the way it goes in Crackdown. Astro City Mini game number 19 is another forgotten game from Sega's past, and it's great to see it here. Cyber Police eSWAT is a side-scrolling action platformer that takes its cues from Shinobi and the RoboCop film series. And by the look of that dorky blue robot armor, maybe even Mega Man? 2 players can team up to fight crime. In the first 3 levels, you're just a normal American cop, shooting everything that moves, including these kids on skateboards. Get 'em, boys! After you've jumped over bullets and killed everyone in your path, you eventually get to the stage boss, who instead of killing, you immediately put in handcuffs. Oh, there you have it. Now you're actually going to arrest somebody. You're going to mercilessly shoot skater kids, but Trash Can Fireman here gets a fair trial? You must have done something good, because at the end of each level you get promoted, all the way up to Chief of Police. Now, I always thought that Chief of Police was the highest police rank for a policeman, but it turns out there's one higher. It's Dork. You become a dork. Yeah, the robotic armor in this game isn't very cool looking when you compare it to other media of the time, but getting the armor does give you a powerful gun and the option to use a super weapon that's charged up by power-ups picked up throughout the level. And these are some very interesting levels with a lot of quirky surprises, and very often it's clear that the developers at Sega had a real sense of humor about this game, because there are a lot of deliberately funny moments. Like this. Or this. eSWAT is an interesting game with fantastic sprite animation, a cool soundtrack, and a lot of wacky, half-baked ideas that sometimes work and sometimes don't. A version was eventually released on the Sega Genesis that was superior in virtually every conceivable way, but for its own time and its own way, eSWAT in the arcades was really cool, especially with 2 players. And yet another forgotten action game from 1989 is Shadow Dancer. This is a tough-as-nails sequel to 1987's Shinobi, It's still a side-scrolling platformer, you still throw shurikens all over the place, you still have these shield guys, and there is still the emphasis on jumping up and down to different planes of action. However, this time Joe Musashi finally dons a full ninja suit with mask included, and he's also brought his dog along. The dog can temporarily distract enemies, allowing you to defeat them without the risk of getting shot, but if the dog takes damage, he morphs into a harmless puppy. The setting for this game is weird. It 100% takes place in the United States, and entirely in the most banal and ugly settings, like the airport, the sewer, a train yard. And the Cracktown guys must have been here because all of these ugly locales are set up to explode. Just like you had to do with the collection of ginger kids in the first game, the object here is to remove all of the bombs, for some reason. And every time you pick up a bomb, your puppy grows back into a menacing wolf. You also get a power-up that makes your shurikens impossible for enemies to block, which is great. And of course you get that ninja magic, which you can use once each level. While the setting for the game is bland and generally ugly, at the very least the sprites are big and detailed, and the music is a tub-thumping mix of Japanese traditional instruments with late 80s club music. Sorta reminds me of Akira. The bonus stages are also back, but this time Joe's gotta defy gravity and common sense by somehow hurling shurikens up an office building. It looks amazing though. Shadow Dancer was ported to all the usual European computers and the Master System, to pretty poor results. However, a sort of remake was released for the Sega Genesis in 1990. It shares a few common elements such as having the dog companion, but it's actually a completely different game, and if I'm being honest, it's a better game in pretty much every way. Shadow Dancer, the arcade game, is kinda ugly and outrageously hard, but it's also a lot of fun to play, and I think it's kind of gotten a bad rap over the years. It's the sequel to one of Sega's most popular arcade games ever, and then it came out just before the Revenge of Shinobi on the Genesis, which is one of the best Genesis games ever made. And then when it finally was ported to the Genesis, it was made into a completely different game that was actually a lot more interesting. Shadow Dancer's real problem isn't that it sucks, it's that it's surrounded by too much awesome. Sort of like Creative Cat Productions. Seriously, tell your friends and family about us. We need them subscribers, yo! (1990) East and West Germany are formally reunited. MC Hammer makes dancing like this cool. It debuts on TV, and Tim Curry would psychologically scar an entire generation. Again. Kevin McAllister is accidentally left home alone. The Super Famicom is released in Japan, and the Sega Mega Drive is released in Europe. And 1990 also saw the release of Alien Storm, an alien invasion themed beat-em-up that has a lot of similarities to Golden Axe. I mean, it's got a female protagonist that uses fire. Does it get more Golden Axe than that? So you're the owner of a food truck called Alien Burgers, and you're doing your thing, serving your customers, when you get a phone call. Aliens from outer space are attacking. So you have to take up your other job as the Alien Busters and kick some alien ass. The good news about this game is that it's awesome. The beat-em-up sections come down to using a medium-ranged attack that stuns slimy space creatures, giving you the chance to deliver a satisfying death blow. Murdering things different from yourself has never been this much fun. But you have to make sure you don't get surrounded, which is hard not to do, because then you're just gonna get absolutely pummeled. Thankfully, the developers have given you a button dedicated to flying across the screen so you can get back to stunning and busting. Eventually you go inside and the game becomes a satisfying first-person gallery shooter that lets you smash everything in sight. In fact, the more you destroy, the more you're rewarded with energy canisters. And with enough energy canisters, just as with Golden Axe, you're able to perform a powerful special attack that clears the screen of aliens. Of course, each character has their own special attack, but they all more or less play the same. Then there are side-scrolling shooter sections, and a couple of good-looking boss fights. But what's strange is that for a game with this much variety, there's also a lot of repetition. Beat-em-ups are traditionally plagued by this problem, but this game kinda takes that sameness and multiplies it a bit. Even your characters keep saying the same catchphrases over and over, and it becomes a little irritating. The cure for this is to play the game's simultaneous co-op mode. Smashing aliens with a friend is much more fun and distracts from this awesome game's gradual encroaching monotony. Alien Storm was one of my favorite games back in the day, and it remains one of my favorites now. Another game released to arcades in 1990 and number 22 on the Astro City Mini is Columns. In 1984, a Soviet computer scientist by the name of Alexei Pajnov developed a video game based on connecting randomly generated geometric pieces called pentaminos. He called the game Tetris, and it was an instant hit at the offices of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The game was passed around to various Soviet institutions where it proved so popular that it ultimately had to be banned. You! Stop having fun! Pajnov forgot that he lived under the iron grip of communism, where the concept of intellectual property does not exist, and so he sought to commercialize Tetris by developing the game for IBM PC. Through a web of personal connections, Pajnov was able to sell the rights to the game to various Western software companies, in particular Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte, through which the game would become a worldwide success on personal computers by 1988. But the game's real legacy would be ignited when rights to produce the game were acquired by Nintendo for the NES and the brand new portable Game Boy console.
Let's go!
Nintendo had always been popular with children, but the inclusion of the addictive and universally appealing Tetris on a portable console meant that for the first time the gaming generation gap had finally been broached. Thanks to the Game Boy, both kids and adults of all ages were psyched about Tetris, and the game would go on to sell more than 35 million copies. It was the first so-called casual game, a game popular not just with gamers, but with your mom and dad too. Tetris was so important and so successful that pretty much every game developer raced to make their own puzzle game. Included in this race was SEGA, who was on the verge of launching their own handheld console called the Game Gear that was supposed to compete directly with Nintendo's Game Boy. And like the Game Boy, they needed Tetris. SEGA had released their own version of Tetris for Japanese arcades, but they had failed to acquire the rights to release the game for any of the home consoles, and they were in trouble. Meanwhile, around the same time period, almost entirely divorced from Tetris mania, an American software engineer by the name of Jay Geertsen invented his own game that he called Columns. Geertsen created Columns as a practice exercise while he was developing graphical applications for X11-based software, with no intention of going into the video game business. The game was shared publicly and got passed around from nerd to nerd until finally one day, the nerds at SEGA noticed. SEGA contacted the relevant legal channels, and very soon they acquired the rights to make the game Columns from Geertsen. And so SEGA had their own Tetris-like app after all. They got Columns, and everyone lived happily ever after. Here it is. This is Columns. It's pretty good. There was another version of Columns also released in 1990. I don't know why. I guess it needed to be different from the Genesis and Game Gear versions. Who knows? Look, Mom, it's Columns. Another game from 1990 on the Astro City Mini is the quirky Bonanza Brothers. Most video games let you fight the bad guys, but Bonanza Brothers actually allows you to play as two thieves as they steal loot and evade the cops. It's Grand Theft Auto, only without the cars. Before each level, you're given a list of treasure that you need to steal. The treasure will be scattered across various building types which you will have to explore. Along the way, however, are various obstacles, people, and armed guards who, if they see you, will put an early end to your criminal career. There are quite a few ways to deal with these obstacles. You can use stealth or speed or traps, or you can slam the door on them. Or when push comes to shove, you can just shoot your way through the situation. But be careful, because your bullets only temporarily stun the guards and are ineffective against their shields. Once you snag all the requisite loot, it's time to make your escape to the roof, where a giant blimp will steal you away in dramatic fashion. It's kind of awesome. Bonanza Brothers is a really good game with a fun sense of humor and a unique audio-visual style that truly stands apart in a sea of early 90s games that basically all tried their hardest to look something like Final Fight. The problem is that, like Cracktown, a lot of people are going to be turned off by the fact that a third of the screen is dedicated to the incredibly useful level map, and that the game is always played as a split-screen experience, even when you're just playing solo. The cure to this, of course, is to play the game with a friend, which is a much better experience than the solo gameplay. If you have someone to share the Astro City Mini with, then this is definitely one of the best games included. Also in 1990, SEGA released Thunder Force AC, an arcade version of Technosoft's outstanding horizontal space shooter, Thunder Force 3, which of course is a Mega Drive game with a great reputation. Thunder Force AC is an awesome shooter, definitely ranking among the greatest shooters of the 90s. And the soundtrack for this game is just as good and adrenaline pumping as the gameplay itself. The main difference between this and the Mega Drive original is that you can no longer choose the order in which you play the levels. And a couple of the levels are different. Also, as with all the other shooters on the Astro City Mini, they've gone ahead and given you the option to use a rapid fire feature, which is really awesome. I guess they know how old and arthritic my fingers are. If you love shooters, then you'll love Thunder Force AC. If not, then maybe this game will be the one that does it for you. What more can I say? It's Thunder Force 3, and it's also on the Sega Genesis Mini. (1991). In 1991, Nirvana named the year's biggest hit song after a crappy brand of deodorant. Will Smith made his television debut as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The Terminator was back, and it was even better than ever. The Super Nintendo was launched in the United States with Super Mario World. But its success wasn't necessarily inevitable thanks to Sega's brand new mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. Also in 1991, Sega released Radmobile, a super scaling arcade game and the first game developed for the System 32 arcade board. I've never actually seen a Radmobile arcade cabinet in the wild. In fact, the only time I recall seeing this game even mentioned was the classic 1992 film Encino Man, with Brendan Fraser and Pauly Shore. The obvious game to compare Radmobile to would be Yu Suzuki's 1986 mega hit Outrun. And boy, the comparison isn't favorable. Both games are cross-country racing games that emphasize the experience of speed and cruising over actual racing. Both games are super scalers. But Outrun came out 5 years before Radmobile, and you know what? It looks a lot better. The main difference probably resides with Outrun's vibrant use of color, whereas Radmobile opts for a grittier, more realistic look. The problem is that Radmobile's brown and gray color palette wasn't matched with the increased detail or resolution in their sprites. The cars and background in Radmobile don't look any better than Outrun. And the combination of gritty color and pixelation makes everything in Radmobile look like mud. And unlike Outrun, which had a beautiful city pop inspired soundtrack that still stands as one of the best ever incorporated into a video game, the only real sounds that can be heard in Radmobile are extremely loud and annoying engine sounds and screeching coming from your car. Further, Outrun also controlled and played much better than Radmobile. First of all, Outrun allowed the player to shift gears. In fact, learning to shift gears was essential to master the game. Radmobile, on the other hand, utilizes an automatic transmission. You can't shift gears? You're trying to drive a race car, but you're using the same transmission system as your mom's minivan? What kind of a racing video game doesn't give you the option to shift gears? Pole Position, a game from 1982, let you shift gears. Shifting gears is as fundamental to a good racing game as having a steering wheel and a brake. It's not optional. Radmobile isn't rad at all, I hate to say it, but Radmobile sucks. Then you get this awful first-person perspective like you're behind the wheel, so the game can be ultra-realistic, which is of course ludicrous because you can't shift gears And the super zoomed in point of view also means that it's a lot harder to gauge exactly where your car is on the road in relation to obstacles, which makes playing much harder. On top of that, this game has decided that head-on traffic should be a thing, so it's a really good thing that Radmobile also has really shitty collision detection, because often you'll just magically pass through objects that would have plainly destroyed you in real life. However, when you do finally hit something, the results are admittedly spectacular. That's just awesome. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't point out something that this game did first, that no other game before it did until this point, and that's that Radmobile gives you the ability to use headlights and windshield wipers. Unfortunately, this sucks too, because not only can you not screw around with these tools arbitrarily, but you can only toggle them on when the level changes and the game prompts you to do so. That's not fun. Being told that I have to turn on my headlights or windshield wipers isn't fun. The only thing missing from this game is a freaking turn signal that you can only use when prompted. I really think Sega messed up pretty bad by putting this on here instead of Outrun, one of the best Sega games ever made. It's not that Radmobile is garbage, it's just that I wouldn't go out of my way to play it when Sega has made so many better racing games. This really might be the worst racing game that Sega has ever made. However, where Sega didn't mess up was with the inclusion of 1991's Cotton, Fantastic Night Dreams, an addictive and fun side-scrolling shooter that has long been a favorite for hardcore gamers the world over. In my world, this game is most famous for being one of the most coveted PC Engine CD games, but it actually started out as an arcade game developed by Success Corporation for Sega hardware. And this being the arcade version, the graphics and animation here are quite a bit better than what I'm used to seeing from this game. It looks fantastic, though it is a little weird that virtually everything seems to have a face. If you see a face, then you need to shoot it. Also, are these flying sperm? I think that they are. I think that's flying sperm. What can I say? Japan is weird. Cotton is a cute, almost childish looking game, but the style of gameplay is actually quite a bit more complex than most shooters. You have two action buttons, one that shoots and one that drops bombs, which is essential to keep in mind because quite a few projectile throwing enemies like to hang out on the floor. As you play, enemies drop yellow crystals. If you gather them up, then you gain points. But if you shoot the crystals as they fall, you can change their colors. Orange crystals give you experience points that go toward leveling up Cotton's normal attack. Red crystals give you fire magic, and blue crystals give you lightning magic. The orange experience crystals and magic crystals are vital to success in this game, so this means that you're going to spend as much time trying to shoot falling yellow crystals as you do navigating and attacking enemies. In fact, crystals are so important, I found myself shooting crystals and basically ignoring enemies. If this game has a downside, then it's this crystal-based power-up system. It's kinda tedious. It would have been much more fun to let the player just focus on fighting enemies and snagging power-ups as in a regular shooter. If this game has another downside, then it would be the use of magic, which requires you to press and hold down the fire button. You hold it down to charge up a shot, then release. The trouble is that Cotton is relentless with the number of enemy sprites it sends at you. Typically the screen is completely full of enemy sprites at any given time, and thus the only way to navigate your way through them is to press the fire button just as relentlessly. And as you hold down that fire button, this means that for a brief moment, you're much more vulnerable to colliding with an enemy. And so frequently I found that my best chance of surviving was to simply ignore the magic attacks altogether. You can also press down, hold, and release the bomb button to send your fairy companion out as a projectile shot, but I found this awkward to pull off for the exact same reason. Now here is a game that would benefit from that $120 full-sized arcade stick. Quirky, cumbersome play mechanics and stiff difficulty aside, I found this game very fun. It's kinda like a shooter's equivalent to Ghosts and Goblins with its high challenge level and medieval gothic horror setting, and that's something I just so happen to really like. One last 1991 game for the Astro City Mini is Arabian Fight, which is both one of the strangest and most intriguing games thrown on here by Sega. Arabian Fight is an Arabian Nights themed beat-em-up that looks like it was lifted straight out of a Ray Harryhausen movie. Specifically, this game looks like and contains elements very similar to films like The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Indeed, many of the images and characters in this game are virtual copies of things found in those movies, which I think is very cool. What's weird is that until the Astro City Mini came out, I'd never heard of this game, nor have I ever seen it in any arcades, anywhere. Not even at Chuck E. Cheese. Reception to this game in the past, if you venture to read about it online, has been mostly negative. People have been critical of the game's repetitive gameplay, lack of diversity, choppy animation, and mediocre sound design. But even with these weaknesses, I couldn't help but really love playing this game, especially in two-player mode. The game's story is entirely in Japanese, but it doesn't take much to figure out that you play as Sinbad and his loyal crew, and that you have to stop an evil wizard who's, wait for it, kidnapped the princess. As stated, this game is a beat-em-up, and as such it plays mostly on par with every other game from the genre around this same time period. You can pummel enemies with combos by repeatedly tapping the attack button. You can grapple and throw your opponents like Streets of Rage if you can get in close enough. You do a dash attack by double tapping forward on the stick before hitting the attack button. And you could do a myriad of jump kicks. A standing jump kick that works as a decent countering move, a forward jump kick that lets you chase enemies just out of range, and most importantly, you have a spinning jump kick that lets you attack into the walking plane either above or below you, a move that's absolutely vital to dealing with boss fights. You see, the big gimmick in this game is that by using tons of sprite scaling, your characters are able to move deep into the Y-axis on the playing field, both toward the background and the foreground. Since the days of Renegade and Double Dragon, it became standard practice to allow players in 2D beat-em-ups to move within a larger environment via the Y-axis. But Arabian Fight takes that concept to the absolute brink of absurdity, and I love it. The art style and constant sprite scaling in this game look fantastic. The only trouble is that the graphics are very grainy, and the frames of animation for every character are surprisingly low. It makes sense that in 1991, with so much going on at the same time on the screen, that a compromise would need to be made. And it doesn't bother me that much. In fact, it kinda makes me feel like I'm playing through a Ray Harryhausen movie. Even more. There were some frames of animation missing in those movies too, you know. In addition to all the normal attacks, you can perform a desperation attack that takes out the enemies on both sides of you by hitting the attack button and jump button at the same time. Also, within every level, there's hidden at least one magical lamp. If you get it, then you can perform a special magic attack, also by tapping attack and jump at the same time. This always causes your character to rush to the foreground and face the player like a scene in an anime. And then the attack is unleashed, usually to spectacular effect. It's awesome. The type of magic depends on the type of lamp that you found. My favorite is the one that turns your character into a bunch of miniature clones that team up to pummel the enemies on screen. It's just hilarious, and it reminds me of the Evil Dead 2 in the best way possible. Most people don't seem to recommend this game, and I understand that some people won't like its repetitive nature, but I found it to be very playable and fun, especially with my kids. If you love this sort of setting as much as I do, and you can get past the choppy animation and grating sound effects, then I think you'll find that this is a really fun and interesting beat-em-up from the early 90s.
Oh.
1992. In 1992, the Cold War was officially declared over between the US and Russia. The Cartoon Network debuted on American cable television. Batman returned, but it was a Catwoman who stole the show. Sailor Moon premiered on Japanese TV. The Super Nintendo finally made its way to Europe, and the Sega CD debuted in North America for a whopping $300. Also in 1992, Sega would release an arcade-exclusive sequel to Golden Axe that, despite its popularity, would never see a home release until now. Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder will probably be for many people the best reason for getting an Astro City Mini. And boy howdy are they right, because this game delivers. Right away, you can see the amount of care that went into this game, from the large detailed sprites and background art. Every square inch of screen across every colorful level just looks fantastic. And the animation is really smooth on top of that. I like the look of Arabian Fight, but this game makes the graphics in that game look primitive and half done by comparison, especially when it comes to the constantly changing playfield. Beat-em-ups are always repetitive by nature, it just goes with the territory, but Revenge of Death Adder keeps the monotony at bay by constantly throwing something new at you. You can ride monsters, you can shoot artillery, You can both ride monsters and shoot artillery at the same time. There are people to rescue, traps to avoid, mini-bosses galore. You can take alternative paths to different levels that enhance the game's replay value. There's a lot going on in this game. Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder is essentially the true sequel to the original arcade classic. The Sega Mega Drive did have 2 sequels of its own, but this is the game that actually builds upon the story and gameplay of the original. It's like The Empire Strikes Back. It takes everything that made the original good and cranks it up to an entirely new level of awesome. The game features 4 playable characters and all are completely new to the series. Though Gilia's Thunderhead does make a return as a non-playable character who rides upon the back of Goa, the giant, the strongest yet slowest of the 4 characters. You can also play as Sternblade the Barbarian. You'll notice that Sternblade looks and plays a lot like Axe Battler from the original Golden Axe. But you might also notice that he uses powerful fire magic, just like Tyrus Flare. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking Sternblade is supposed to be the son of both Axe Battler and Tyrus Flare. It makes sense. You can also play as Dora, who spends most of her time with the lower extremities of a horse. She's a centaur after all. But whenever she mounts another creature, suddenly she's a normal person. So I guess she's whatever she wants to be. She's really good at kicking ass too, quite literally. And then there's Lil Trix. When he's not busting out new jams and fat beats for SoundCloud, he's serving up a whoopin' with his giant fork of doom. And if you're ever hungry, he can summon fruit-bearing apple trees. You know what? Don't worry about Lil Trix. Let's just pretend that he's not in the game. Let's just ignore him. Really, the only complaints I have about this game are the fact that the character designs are not quite my style. Give me those cliched Dungeons & Dragons heroes from the original anytime. I've never much wanted to play as a dumb giant, a centaur, or this. Sternblade is as traditional as it gets, and you know, sometimes traditional is the best route to take. Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder is an adventure worth taking, and it comes with one of the single greatest final boss encounters that I have ever experienced in a video game. I won't tell you anything about it, but let's just say that the game pulls no punches and goes out on top with a bang. I freaking loved the last stage. It was completely badass. So far, yeah, this is the best reason to get an Astro City Mini, by far. The only other 1992 game on the Astro City Mini is the puzzle block game known as Puyo Puyo, which has been released in recent years in many forms. This is the arcade original, which was eventually ported to the Mega Drive as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. There's not much to be said about this game. Its sequel Puyo Puyo 2 is also on here. Since both games are practically identical, I'll just say I really enjoyed playing that game, and I'll say that my daughter really loves both of these games. It's especially fun in the 2-player mode, though we really didn't need both versions on the Astro City Mini. (1993). In 1993, Jurassic Park stunned audiences worldwide with believable CGI dinosaurs. Meatloaf would do anything for love, but for some reason, he wouldn't do that. Hulk Hogan defeated the Great Muta in an amazing dream match. Doom was released on MS-DOS and became a PC gaming blockbuster. Star Fox introduced Super Nintendo owners to 3D polygonal graphics. And Sega introduced the world to 3D fighting games. Twice! Dark Edge is one of the weird games that Sega threw on the Astro City Mini that got people all excited, mostly because almost no one has ever heard of it until now. But surprisingly enough, it turns out that Sega released a full-blown 3D fighting game utilizing 2D sprites many months before their famous Virtua Fighter would come out and be regarded as the first 3D fighting game. How did this happen? Well, because this is a game people just didn't care that much for. I don't even think this was ever released in the United States, though I could be wrong. A lot of people have harped on this game, highlighting the ugly sprites and disorienting gameplay. But I spent a fair amount of time trying to get to know this game, And you know what? I kinda liked it. I kinda liked it a lot. But maybe that's just because I'm crazy. I think the character designs are pretty cool, in a futuristic cyberpunk sort of way, and I think the background art is absolutely phenomenal. Everything is animated well enough, and I was blown away by the fact that this is a true 3D fighting experience through and through. In fact, the gameplay in Dark Edge is technically far more 3D than Virtual Fighter, and they did it with 2D sprites! I found that being able to circle your opponent and change directions at will added a fun dynamic to the typical fighting gameplay. In almost every fighting game, especially up to this point, the best you could do to defend against an attack was to either just preemptively attack or crouch and block, which more often than not meant giving your opponent time to follow up with his own attack. But in this game, you have the option of simply getting out of the way. In fact, I was most successful at this game when I let my opponent lunge at me first. Then I'd circle and counter. Unfortunately, this is a 90s fighting game, so that means there are movesets that have to be memorized for every character in order to get the most out of the game. And unlike popular fighting games, there are no moveset lists for this game on the internet. With trial and error, I was able to figure out some of the movesets for this guy called Thud, but I have no idea as to whether or not what I've learned is exhaustive. Or some of these moves are a bit too difficult to pull off to be practical, which again is perfectly in line with the fighting games of the era. For instance, to pull off this powerful spinning attack, you have to quickly rotate the joystick in a complete circle away from your opponent 2 full times and hit the punch button at just the right moment. Good luck doing that when your orientation is constantly changing as you and your opponent spin around each other. While I did love the fast-paced 3D gameplay, I have to admit that it was very disorienting. Forward is always contingent upon your opponent's relation to you, so frequently forward can be one of 8 different directions on the joystick, and it can be hard to say which direction is correct when trying to pull off your moves. And being unable to hit your best signature move pretty much all the time means that past level 3 or so, the computer will absolutely destroy you. But as with all fighting games, the real way to play this is with another person. And it's in 2-player mode that this game really shines, because when 2 people fumble together, things can get kind of fun. It's like a night out drinking with your friends, falling all over the place, getting dizzy, disoriented, then maybe you throw up and wake up with a headache. I can see why a lot of people wouldn't like this. I certainly wouldn't make the decision to get an Astro City Mini or not contingent upon Dark Edge, but at the same time, I did like it. Also, the music in this game is just badass. I really love the music. Check it out. Taunt R is a series of timed puzzles and brain teasers that reminds me a lot of Nintendo's WarioWare. Some of these puzzles were pretty fun, many were a chore, and a few were completely incomprehensible to me without any cultural context or the ability to read Japanese. But it really was surprising to see just how many of these puzzles are in this game. I don't know the exact number, but it must be a lot. Here are a couple of examples. I really don't think many people will want to spend much time playing this, especially in single player mode, but as a 2-player game it can be fun to try and best one another, or simply trying to figure out what you're supposed to be doing together. Even then though, at times this is more like a lighthearted homework assignment than a video game. I really didn't need this one. Easily Sega's biggest game in 1993 was the arcade hit Virtual Fighter, which along with Virtual Racing is widely credited for kicking off the 3D polygon revolution. While the game was popular in the US, in Japan it was a smash hit of such great magnitude that calling the game a hit would be an understatement. It was a gaming revolution. The credit for Virtual Fighter once again falls to Yu Suzuki and Sega's innovators at AM2, who were aiming not only at transforming how fighting games looked, but also how they played. Yu Suzuki even had to start training in Kung Fu himself in China in order to ensure that he understood how the game's characters ought to move. The result of such careful planning and attention to detail was a fighting game with unparalleled depth and realism. Well, realism in the sense of replicating the action from a good kung fu movie. Maybe not realism in the sense of replicating an actual fight in the really real world, because the last time I checked, doing a backflip or jumping 10 feet in the air weren't common features of the UFC. Of all the games that people are going to highlight as a big deal on the Astro City Mini, this game is typically the biggest, and perhaps that's because Virtual Fighter, the arcade version, is easily the most advanced game ever emulated in one of these retro mini consoles. Sure, the PS1 had some 3D games on there, but they weren't emulated all that well, and the consumer-friendly PlayStation wasn't on the same level as Sega's Model 1 arcade board. Not quite. So how did Virtual Fighter hold up on the Astro City Mini? The answer is remarkably well. I had heard that there were some issues with input delay on here. Some people described it as game ruining, in fact. But once again, as with our TurboGrafx-16 Mini review, I have to chalk that up to the hyperbole of dedicated purists. I had no issues playing this game at all. As far as I can tell, it plays exactly the way I remember it. You know, kinda slow and wonky. The only issue I found was that the frame rate drops a bit during the instant replays. But this didn't really bother me. I only noticed it because I was looking for it because it's this topic that everyone's already talked about. In fact, if anything, due to the graphics being upscaled to 720p, I can honestly say that this game has never looked better. This is a great home version of Virtual Fighter. You may notice that the game's backgrounds sometimes kind of stutter as the players rotate around the arena, but that's actually true to the arcade original, or at least to the emulators that I've seen online. I said Virtual Fighter has never looked better. I didn't say that Virtual Fighter ever really looked that good to begin with. As a first-generation 3D polygon game, Virtual Fighter looked dated almost from day one, with extremely plain-looking textures that give the game a prototype sort of feel. The game's controls have always been very sluggish, and the characters sometimes move like they're on the moon or underwater, especially if you jump. I mean, holy cow, look at that! People might be complaining about some kind of input delay, but trust me, that's not broken emulation. That's just how Virtual Fighter actually plays. At the same time, the depth in this game is pretty staggering for 1993. This came out the same year as Mortal Kombat 2, a great game in its own right, but it was freaking child's play compared to the kind of intense matches that were possible in Virtual Fighter. That being said, I really think Sega could have included a moveset for this game, because the possible moves and combos for all 8 characters are very lengthy. Virtual Fighter isn't perfect. Its sequel, Virtual Fighter 2 on the other hand, comes pretty close to being perfect. That game is a masterpiece, but still, Virtual Fighter was a very good game, and a great addition to the Astro City Mini, especially given the fact that the emulation looks so good. However, I heard someone claim that Virtual Fighter alone was worth the price of the Astro City Mini. That's not true. This emulated ROM drop of Virtual Fighter is not worth $120 by itself. I mean, why would it be? But it is still a great game, and I'm glad it's on here. (1994). In 1994, the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation both debuted in Japan. Meanwhile, Donkey Kong Country smashed sales expectations, making the Super Nintendo the most successful console of the year by far. The arcades were hot, and Sega's Daytona USA and Virtual Fighter 2 were among the best offers at the time, which is why it is utterly baffling that the last 3 games on the Astro City Mini, representing 1994, are such utter trash. First we have Stack Columns. It's just a lame version of Columns with a seedy theme. It sucks. Then there is Ichidan R, the sequel to Tantar. It's exactly the same type of game, only now there are different mini-games. It's fine. At the very least, the games are different. Some of these are really fun, it's good with a friend, but it suffers from all the same shortcomings of the first game. And then there was Puyo Puyo 2, but we've already talked about Puyo Puyo, and there isn't anything more to be said about it. It is what it is. So there you go. That's all the games on the Astro City Mini. The Astro City Mini is a beautiful, if not complete, representation of Sega's best years in the arcade, which were from 1984 through on down to the debut of the Sega Saturn, after which the company began to sort of suffer until it was finally snuffed out by Sammy in 2003. There are a lot of really good games included on here, including a few interesting surprises that have not seen the light of day in decades. The emulation, with a few exceptions here and there, appears to me to be nothing short of fantastic. Everything looks, plays, and sounds exactly as it should, as far as I'm concerned. With that being said, let's just take a look at the pros and cons of the Astro City Mini once more.
Pros.
The Astro City Mini comes with 36 games, which is a lot of arcade games. And the sum total of those games are in my estimation worthy of the price. Cons. But what a hefty price it is. At $120 just for the machine itself, this is one of the most expensive retro mini consoles ever made. And you're definitely going to want to buy either at least one of the $40 controllers or the $120 arcade stick, which makes it for sure the most expensive retro mini console ever made. Unless of course you consider this $450 SNK Giant a mini console, which I do not.
Pros.
But at the very least, the unit itself and those gamepads are very well made, and to be honest, if you absolutely don't want to get a controller, most of the games still play very nicely on the unit, except for the tape mode games, of which there are 3. Those will be very hard to see. Cons. A few of the games just suck. Radmobile is, in my opinion, a pretty bad racing game, and probably not a lot of people are going to be too excited about My Hero or Sonic Boom. Columns 2 and Stat Columns shouldn't be on here, and neither should both Puyo Puyo games. And it's really an egregious failure to include Quartet without fixing the bugs on level 15, 16, and 17, which essentially make that game unbeatable. That was a miserable oversight on the part of Sega. And it was also a virtual crime against Sega fans everywhere that the Astro City Mini didn't come with either Hang-On, Outrun, Virtual Racing, or Virtual Fighter 2, or Dynamite Ducks. The omission of those games keep this from being a must-have mini console.
Pros.
But at the same time, there were some incredible games put on here, and as far as I can tell, they're practically perfect. For a lot of people, the inclusion of Cotton, Revenge of Death Adder, and Virtual Fighter are going to be determinative. For me, it's also great to be able to play the arcade version of Cracktown, Ninja Princess, Alien Syndrome, Shinobi, Golden Axe, Alien Storm, and the Bonanza Brothers.
Cons.
Yet while the library is good, there is no rewind feature, which has become commonplace in retro packages like this, and there are no other special features or even much information provided about the games, other than a few words from the menu screen. As an anniversary celebration, a historic retrospective, this is a pretty bare bones package.
The verdict.
If you're into 2-player gameplay, then the Astro City Mini is a clear winner. We give the Astro City Mini a high recommendation, especially for old school Sega fans. If you're a fan of Sega's glorious past and you remember playing Virtual Fighter in the arcades, then the Astro City Mini is pretty much a must-buy for you. It's far from perfect, but it still pulls off some amazing tricks anyway. This has been our comprehensive review of Sega Sammy's Astro City Mini console. If you've made it this far, then you are a legend, and we greatly appreciate it. So, what do you all think about the Astro City Mini? Do you already have one? Are you thinking about getting one? Please let us know in the comments, and thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye bye now.